Hello. So, continuing to our video tutorial. I have opened already my WAMP. I have opened my localhost, my PHP, my admin, and of course our text editor, Atom. So, we are just going to continue our previous code. So, this is our previous code, last code, and the output is this one. So, yours should look like this one also, not probably the perfect email address and password, but it should be on this pattern. So let's continue. Noticing that in our database, we have actually 4 entries in our table users. But in our output, we are only reflecting 1. So to reflect these 3, we are going to use or modify our code. But first, I'm going to comment out this line of code. So again, from our if statement, this part, so let me just enlarge it. Okay, from this block of code, this is responsible for fetching the result of our uh, query. It is stored in our variable row, but it is only displaying one single entry. So for us to display the additional entries, you you are going to use your while statement. So this is not new to you. So I'm going to use my while statement. I'm going to cut this one and place it as a parameter. And I'm going to omit or delete my semicolon and replace it with curly braces. After that, I'm going to use print R. Again, this is not new to you. We have already used this on our previous video. Again, print R is going to print a readable version of the result of this code. So I'm going to print the readable version of variable row. Okay, so let's save it and refresh our browser. So there we have it. We have successfully displayed the remaining entries in our table users. For us to view it in a more orderly pattern, let's use the console. Right click our browser and view source so that we could actually see a more organized display. So we have here the 4 entries in our table users using the while statement. Now, what about if I would only want to display or select bsit2020 at gmail.com instead of displaying all of them? So we could do that by simply using our keyword where. Okay, so as I've mentioned, I would only like to display BSIT 2020. For this example, I'm going to utilize its user ID. The user ID of BSIT 2020 is 3. So I'm going to insert that in my where clause. I'm going to say where user ID is equal to 3. So my code now says I'm going to select all from my table users where the user ID is equivalent to 3. So I'm going to save it. Let's check, refresh it. So there we have it. We are now only viewing bsit2020 at gmail.com with an ID of 3. So that's one use, or that's a good use for the where clause. How about if I would like to display all email address with a gmail.com domain? So as you can see, one of our entries is using at yahoo.com, but the rest are gmail.com. Again, to do that, we have to edit or modify again our query. Instead of user ID, I will utilize email. So email is from our attribute from table users. And I'm going to introduce the keyword like. Okay. So I'm going to choose all from users or email like single quotes and your percent sign. And I'm going to type gmail.com. I'm going to save it. So what will this do? It will select all email with an or with a string of gmail.com on it. So for us to visualize it, I'm going to refresh again our browser. Okay. So I'm just going to double check my code. So there we should remove this one, equal sign, and let's try to check. So I'm going to save my code. There. So our mistake was, or my mistake was placing an equal sign on my like. So again, my final code is select all from users or email like. We have the single quotes, percent sign, gmail.com. So it will select all entries which have a gmail.com on it. So as we can see, we only have 3 entries selected. As I've said before, the other one is using yahoo.com. We could also use our uh, comparison operators in our where clause. So for example, I'm going to modify this again. So for example, I'm going to use again user ID, where user ID is, let's say, greater or equal to 4. So I'm only selecting entries where user ID is greater or equal to 4. So let's save it. Refresh. So it only selected user ID which is equivalent to 4 or greater than 4. So we have 5 and 6, which is ccs at gmail.com and anything at yahoo.com. Now, in the where clause, we could actually combine those parameters that we would like to. For example, here I have set that the user ID should be greater or equal to 4, but I would like again to add an additional parameter. So I'm going to use the keyword and. Again, this was discussed on our previous lectures. What's the difference of and or? So I'm going to place there and email like. So let's go back to our database. Let's say, okay, going to place your uh, C, then again another percent sign. So take a look. I have placed here email like. We have used a capital C just to show you that it's not case sensitive. Okay, so this query is telling us that we will select all entries from users where the user ID must be equal or greater to 4 and the email should have a character C on it. Okay, so let's save it and refresh. Okay, so again, it has selected 2 because they are both greater than 4 and both has a letter C on it. So let me select one word or letter that is different from the other, and that should be N. Okay, so only anything at yahoo.com has a character N. So let us revise our code. Instead of C, going to use N. Save it and refresh it. So there we have it. ccs at gmail.com does not have any N character on its entry. That's why we only retained anything at yahoo.com. So let's check the parameters. User ID should be greater or equal to 4. Its user ID is 6. That's correct. And it should have a character N on it. And there we have it, an N character on the email address. So again, we have introduced while loop in displaying all of the entries in our table users. And if you would like to select only a specific entry based from their attributes, we have to use the where clause. And lastly, remember, we could combine parameters in our where clause. We also have introduced the keyword like and how does it function. So this will be the end of our video. See you on the next tutorial.